The biggest lie, the most demonstrably false statement made by politicians in New York today isn't what you think it is. It isn't, we're not going to raise your taxes. It isn't, we're the government and here to help you. It isn't any of that. It is, hate has no place here. It is a lie that I see repeated ad nauseum by politicians. Anytime anything happens, hate has no place here. And a number of weeks ago, the new mayor globalized the Intifada, said that in response to an anti-Semitic incident. Hate has no place here, and I tweeted, that's just not true. Hate has a place. It even has an address. It's Gracie Mansion, New York, New York. I mean, the idea that politicians would continuously say hate has no place here in response to incidents that are caused by their own hatred is something that I think as New Yorkers we should be offended by. I certainly am. I know Councilwoman Vernikov is. And, but it's something we hear repeatedly. A number of days ago in Borough Park, USA, it's the world capital of Jewry. I don't care what anybody else says, it is. It's my former council district. I no longer represent it as an assemblyman, but it's very close to my heart. And it's right next door to my district. It's a few minutes from Ina's district and my district. And it is where the largest number of Holocaust survivors anywhere in the world outside of Israel live. It is where the largest number of Orthodox Jews in any concentrated community live. And a park in our community had graffiti scrawled, swastikas, anti-Semitic graffiti, 2 days in a row. The first, it was just a handful, and then the second, it was 57 swastikas. I don't know how they came up with these, I mean, they're kids. I don't know how they came up with the number 57. And they just kept on scrolling them, and it's all over the park. And it's an incredible park. It's, if you know Brooklyn at all, it's located in the middle of Borough Park, and when you walk by it, you see Orthodox kids and Latino kids and black kids and Asian kids and every other kid, and it's a block or two away from FDR High School in Brooklyn, which is a 3,500 kid school, and it's a park that everybody uses. And whenever something like that happens, aside from the lie, hate has no place here, we also hear, we need to educate the children. We need to educate them. What do we need to educate them on? Not to draw swastikas? They're not born with the knowledge of how to draw a swastika. The language we should be using is we need to uneducate them of what they were taught. And for the most part, I am a believer that they were not taught this at home. For the most part, I believe that parents are not teaching their children to hate. They're learning it from the public personas that they pay attention to, whoever they may be, whether it's politicians, whether it's the media, whether it's music figures, whomever it may be, that's where they're learning it from. They're not learning it at home, and they're also learning it at school. I'm gonna say that again, because it's something that Ina and I worked very hard on when we were in the council, and she's leading this battle today, still in the city. It's something they learn at school. It's something they learn in the New York City public school system. It's something they learn in CUNY. They are educated to hate. So when we talk about if only they had a little more education, what we really mean to say is they need to have a little less education on how to hate Jews. I once heard you may not know this comedian, his name is Modi, and he spoke about this, and he said, whenever they catch somebody who did some anti-Semitic thing, their punishment, they send them to a Holocaust museum. And he said, that seems to me to be like an amusement park. Like, you catch a kid who did an anti-Semitic thing, and then you send them to see some more anti-Semitism. And he walks out and he says, wow, that was a great ride, let me go again. That's not how you teach. You teach by punishing. You teach by making sure that there are consequences. You teach by making sure that people know that this is not the kind of society that anything you do is acceptable and anything you say can go. And I want to stop here because you're going to hear from, without question, one of the smartest members of the City Council. It's not hard to say that because if you know the City Council, you're really looking at a small universe. But She's a giant, and she's alone there. I just want you to understand that. You know, not to pat myself on the back, but now that I'm not there, she's really alone fighting this fight. Because even those who you would think would stand up for the Jewish people shirk their responsibility and sit down far too often. So please give a warm Albany welcome. This is my new hometown, as you know, Ina, to City Councilwoman Yeger and Vernikov.
Thank you very much. I think I'll do it from here because I think actually everyone could see me better here. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilmember Yeger and Vernikov. First of all, I'd like to thank Fran and Jerry for inviting me here today. It's my honor and privilege to be here. Oh, hi, Chairman. The Conservative Party has been a real true friend to the Republicans and the common sense Democrats in City Hall, so thank you again. We're 5 out of 51. We were 6 last year, but we unfortunately lost a seat, so we're 5 Republicans in a sea of Democrats and a lot of lunacy, so it is not an easy task, and so we thank friends from all the corners. So I'm an immigrant from the former Soviet Union. I came here at the age of 12, and a lot of our families were back in the Soviet Union experiencing systemic anti-Semitism on many levels of government, and our families lived through communism and socialism, and that's why I've been so outspoken on our current mayor, Mamdani. Did pretty much everything we could to make sure he doesn't get elected. Unfortunately, he still got elected, and now we have to deal with this mayor. In terms of how detrimental he is to the Jewish community, this is a guy who refused to condemn Hamas. It's unthinkable that in New York City, where we have the largest population of Jews outside of Israel, we have a mayor. It's unthinkable and really unprecedented that we have a mayor who refused to condemn a designated terror organization who's responsible for butchering hundreds, thousands of innocent civilians. He refused to condemn globalized intifada, which is, let's be clear, it is a call to violence against the Jewish people. He's someone who aligned himself with those who support terror. He's friends with Hassan Piker, who said America deserved 9/11. And this is a guy who, on his first day in office, revoked 2 executive orders put in by Mayor Adams that are detrimental to combating anti-Semitism. So, and he is extremely focused, even though his job is to make sure our streets are clean and our schools are functioning and our roads are fixed. He's hyper-focused on the politics of Middle East and the state of Israel. And so I feel that it's my job, especially as someone who is a Jewish immigrant from the former Soviet Union, who understands the danger of anti-Semitism, to do everything I can to fight this guy's policies, to fight his rhetoric, and to stand up for the Jewish community. And the Assemblyman and I have done a lot of work when he was in the council, and we continue to work together to make sure that we stand up for our communities, that the civil rights of the Jewish people are not violated, which they are trampled on every single day. We've been seeing an extreme rise in a hostile environment for Jewish students and Jewish professors across the board on our college campuses, not just in New York City, but in this country. And most recently, very scary to me, is we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism on the far right, which I am very big on fighting about, because I think that what happened with the Democratic Party is that the left took over that party. And the problem is that the Democrats and the Democratic establishment allowed that to happen. And that's how the Democratic Party lost its moral ground. And so for me, as a Republican and a conservative, it's important that the Republicans, the leadership in the Republican Party, stand up to the far right, to figures like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, who are actually anti-American, not just anti-Semitic. I believe that their values are completely not aligned with the Western values. They've become one and one with the left at this point, but especially with their anti-Semitic rhetoric, where someone like Nick Fuentes straight up says that Jews don't belong in government and they don't belong in our society, and who has such a large platform that especially young Americans listen to. And the problem is that that rhetoric often turns to violence, and we see that happening almost every day now. It's become normalized. It's an everyday occurrence that we see, whether it's an anti-Semitic hate crime or some teacher in some public school saying some stuff or doing things. The teachers in public schools today, they're the leaders of the very things that are against the policy of the Department of Education. They lead the riots. The professors at Columbia University were in the encampments, leading the encampments. So there's a lot of chaos, and the problem is there's not enough leadership who's willing to stand up in a meaningful way. What do I mean by that? I mean, not just tweeting anti-Semitism is bad, we don't like hate, hate doesn't belong here. And like Assemblyman Yeger said, hate unfortunately very much belongs here. And like the CUNY chancellor, when he testified in Congress, said hate doesn't belong in the City University of New York, it doesn't live here. Well, no, it actually, that is where it lives. It lives in the City University of New York. And so there are very few, unfortunately, very few bold leaders who are willing to do more than just tweet, we don't like anti-Semitism, who are willing to actually take action. That may not be politically convenient. It may be uncomfortable. It may be really uncomfortable if you're the only one in the room saying something that is different from what everyone else is saying and doing. And so I think that's what we see our jobs as, especially because we represent such large numbers of Jewish New Yorkers. And I think we're going to keep doing that. And we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
The first question comes from a New York City area code. And the question is, one thing that always confused me is 33% of Jewish voters helped elect Mamdani. Can you shed light on why, even after his clear anti-Semitism, they could cast their vote for him? That's to both.
Sure, I'll answer that. 33% by whose definition? Jew. And what I mean is, if the only time that you are a Jew is the day that you voted for Mamdani, and the other 364 days a year you're not, if you're driving on Yom Kippur, if you're eating pork, if you're going to McDonald's, if you don't send your kids to yeshiva, if you don't have a synagogue that you're a member of, if your name is Whoopi Goldberg, that doesn't make you a Jew. And the idea that, you know, I wondered that because I always heard that stat, a third of the Jews. Not in my neighborhood, not in Nina's neighborhood. I represent a district that, unlike my council district, which was very heavily Orthodox, my assembly district is not as heavily Orthodox and also has a substantial black population. It's about 25% black. And in the general election this past year, Andrew Cuomo won it in the general election, also in the primary, but in the general election. Mamdani did not win my district. It's not true that a third of Jewish New Yorkers, if you consider that the representative body of being Jewish is actually living your life as a Jew. And I think that when you start to actually look deeply into the EDs, the election districts throughout the city, and you see 97% to 3%, there's no question that stat is just not accurate.
Ina, first of all, I want to apologize. When I introduced you, I pronounced your name as Ina. So I know it's Ina. I apologize.
It's okay. Nobody gets it right.
Well, anyway, the second question I have, I will read it as it is given to me. So, to both of you, anti-Semitism and hate are coming from the left and the right, while many debate a big tent of ideas, is it not time for parties and leaders to define what and who they are and are not? Question mark. Should hate and people espousing it and policies in that vein be called out? Question mark. Bluntly, is it time for state leaders, even J.D. Vance and others, to call out the hate and stop tailoring history to accommodate those who might agree with us on taxes, etc., but are racist or anti-Semitic? Question mark. If not now, when? Question mark. A lot in there.
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, I think it is extremely important that we call out anti-Semitism both on the right and the left. I think that for years now, I've been speaking about the anti-Semitism coming from the Democratic Party, their anti-Israel stance, and how their leaders have completely failed the Jewish and pro-Israel communities. I mean, it's part of why I ran for office, because the Democratic Party has failed so badly on this issue. But now it's time for us to be courageous and call it out within our own ranks, because if we don't do that, then we're really failing at our moral conscience. And what is going to become of the Republican Party if we allow these minority, by the way, of voices to take over? So yes, and I call on all the leaders, including J.D. Vance, who unfortunately has not been so outspoken on this issue. Ted Cruz, however, has been, so I think we need to kind of take leadership examples from him. He's been extremely outspoken on the rising tide of anti-Semitism, and so I think it's very, very important that leaders within the party call out the anti-Semites on the right.
I think the grand bipartisan issue is the place where the far left and the far right meet, but in a horseshoe, because they're not really attached. They just come together at the tips, and it's on anti-Semitism. It's a bipartisan issue. You know, I have the luxury of living in New York City, and in my city, 100% of Republican elected officials are not anti-Semitic. I can't say the same about Democratic elected officials. Now, you can go to other parts of the country. There's no question that there are anti-Semites in the Republican Party in Congress. One just resigned. There's another one from Kansas, Congressman Massey, from Kentucky, excuse me. But Councilman Vernikov pointed out to two very strong voices in the Republican Party. The Democratic Party also has strong voices like that, like Senator Fetterman, for example. There are strong voices in both parties who stand up to anti-Semitism and who don't mind calling out members of their own party, which is the most important part. It's easy for a Republican to yell at Democrats, and it's easy for the Democrat to yell at Republicans. The courage is when you yell at your members of your own party. I'm a Democrat, it's not a secret, and I find that I frequently and almost exclusively have to call out members of my own party for their anti-Semitism. Members of Congress, for example, in New York City, right? There's one Republican. 100% of the Republican members of Congress from New York City are not anti-Semitic. That's easy to say. Everybody knows her. She's a good member. Can't say that about the Democratic members of Congress because I can count just on the top of my head at least two. But on the other hand, we have someone like Richie Torres, who is, you may not agree with him on anything on politics, but he is a strong, strong voice fighting the hard left anti-Semitism in his party, in our party. Congresswoman Grace Meng is another strong voice like that. So Congressman Dan Goldman, I can go on. There are good voices in both parties. Our jobs, whatever party you're in, is to strengthen the strength and the strong voices of the members of your own party, and also be prepared and ready to stand up and criticize the members of your own party. Don't need you to cross party lines and criticize the member from the other party. That's easy. We do that all the time. We do that because that's what we're trained to do. Criticize your own house and clean it up, and I think that's something that has to be bipartisan too.
Okay. The next question is, since October 7, 2023, have you noticed any significant change in political allegiance among the Jewish voters in New York City away from the Democratic Party?
I think we all saw that after October 7th, a lot of Jewish voters shifted to the Republican Party. Also, we have to remember that President Trump is probably the best friend that the Jewish people have ever had in a president. And I think the stark difference between the candidates when we watch the race for president is, it speaks for itself. And President Trump has always supported the Jewish community. He's always supported the state of Israel. He always spoke up for Israel. He had a great relationship with the Prime Minister of Israel. And I think that the Jewish voters, even though a lot of them voted Democrat for a long time, they started waking up to how indifferent the Democratic Party became towards them because of their refusal to speak up and stand up for them in a real way, and allowing things like a hostile environment on college campuses to take place. I mean, just take a look at the encampments post-October 7th that were totally anti-Semitic and totally violated the civil rights of Jewish students across the country, where we watched on video with our own eyes Jewish students with the Star of David or a yarmulke unable to get to class because they had protesters blocking them. These kids just want to go to school and learn. They're not interested in engaging in riots or protests. And they couldn't do that. And there were no Democrats, well, maybe there were some, like Assemblyman mentioned, but not on a level that we would like to see as a community who, by the way, has really supported Democrats. In fact, when we came to this country as immigrants, we were all Democrats. My family was all registered Democrats. Everyone was a Democrat. The Democratic Party was a totally different place than it is today. And so, yes, I think after October 7th, especially seeing the vile rhetoric and actions and watching how these protesters or rioters or these uneducated kids on the streets would remove posters of hostages that were taken by Hamas, and watching the inaction, yes, I think that, even though they may disagree with some of the policies of someone like President Trump, they decided, look, we are at a essential point where our existence, our very existence is being threatened. So, let's talk about cleaning the snow and childcare a little later. Let's try to do what we can to just survive in this country. And so I think that's why they went for President Trump, somebody who supported the Jewish community in the state of Israel like no one ever did before.
Okay, thank you. This will be the last question. I'm going to rephrase it just slightly. Many people are afraid to speak out and criticize the actions of Jewish individuals and politicians because they're afraid of being labeled as anti-Semitic. What do you think is a good way to address this so that our political conversation can always be a more honest one?
Look, if you don't like my position on, taxes, on, motor vehicle registration, on anything, and you want to get up and say so, doesn't make you an anti-Semite. Just doesn't. And I don't subscribe to the theory that you can't criticize a Jewish elected official without being called an anti-Semite. It's just not true. Trust me, I get criticized all the time, and many of the people who criticize me are not anti-Semites. Most of them actually look kind of like me. So, and that's okay. That's right. That's why we run for office. It's fine. I do think that, looking at Twitter, not that Twitter is, the Bible of the world and should be viewed as the encyclopedia to world opinion, but it's a good guide point. And you see the vile things that get said about Jews, about Jewish elected officials, like or don't like Chuck Schumer, but some of the stuff that gets said about him is anti-Semitic. It's just the way it is. You gotta call it that. The irony is people hear a name like Fetterman and they think he's a Jew, and then they start going anti-Semite on him as well. It's okay to criticize a Jewish elected official. You don't like something that Ina does and you want to call her out on it, that's fine. But if you say, some of the stuff that I've seen said about her on Twitter, that makes you an anti-Semite, and you're going to get responded to, and you should be called an anti-Semite if you're an anti-Semite.
But I also think they found a really sneaky way to criticize Jews without being called anti-Semitic, is they say those Zionists oh, those pesky Zionists. And it's such a misconception about Zionists. Zionists, first of all, there are many non-Jewish Zionists, but also all that Zionists are those people who believe in the self-determination of the Jewish people and that the Jewish people have a right to a homeland. And I think that's just plain common sense for people who have been persecuted and prosecuted for centuries, expelled from every country in the world, to have their own homeland. And, they have, 27 countries for Muslims, is it? And just one small, tiny country for the Jewish people, which, by the way, has equal rights for not just Jewish people, but for everyone, for Christians and for Muslims. So the hypocrisy is just astounding, but they did find a way to criticize Jews that makes a lot of people very comfortable by calling them Zionists.
I just want to add to that. She's right on that. This notion of I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just anti-Zionist is the biggest falsity and canard. I'm going to tell you why. And this goes back to the original question about this 33% Jews, Whoopi Goldberg Jews. When Jews who observe worship every day, they pray for the longing for the return to Zion. It's not something that was invented 45 years ago. It's not something that Bibi Netanyahu invented. It is a basic tenet of Judaism, of Jewish belief. So when you say that you're anti-Zionism, what you're saying is you're picking off a piece of our belief system and you're saying I'm anti that belief system. In other words, to use another religion, I may get myself in trouble, I'm gonna do it anyway, and please know that I do this with love. If somebody got up and said, I'm not anti-Catholic, but I'm just anti that whole eating the wafer and drinking the wine thing, okay? They're anti-Catholic. They're anti-Catholic, and if you can't say that out loud, to bifurcate off, to allow people to snippet a piece of your religion and say, I'm only against that portion of your religion. Who are you to condemn my religion and think that I'm not going to respond by calling you an anti-my religion? Whether, in my example, that means you're anti-Catholic, or whether in the vernacular, and as we know and we see today, that means you're an anti-Semite. When Zoran Mamdani says that he's not anti-Semitic, he's only anti-Zionist, he is not talking to my community. What he's talking about is the Whoopi Goldberg Jews. And that's okay if that's who he wants to talk to, but that means he's still an anti-Semite.